Hi all. And so now we're going to dive into a little bit about the actual what we're going to be working on this semester and our overall project, as well as talking a little bit about the first week or so of the semester. And so we're tasked with a project this semester. There's an issue. We have an issue. We have the Green River. Here's a river in an undisclosed location. And a couple of years ago, there was a team out inspecting this river, and everything was fine. Thriving ecosystem, everything seemed healthy, everything was just fine on this river. Recently, however, there's been down here at the downstream location here, what we call Site C. It's been observed that there's a lot of algae growth and a lot of fish kill happening here. And so a concerned citizen wrote into the Department of Environmental Protection and said, hey, I've noticed this is going on. What's happening with our river? And the Department of Environmental Protection has then now tasked us at USM with figuring it out. And so that is our big goal, is to try to figure out what is happening on this river. And there's a couple things that might be contributing. Here at Site A housing development has been put in since the first observation. Here at Site B, a textile mill has gone in. And so what we're going to be doing throughout the course of the semester is a series of 5 different experiments to try to see if the housing development and or the textile mill are somehow contributing to this degradation in water quality that we found. And so that's our big goal, is to try to figure that out. Are one of these sites possibly contributing to the issues that we're seeing? And so in order to look at that, like I said, we've got a series of 5 different experiments that we're going to do. Some of these are 2-week experiments. And we have 5 different sample spots. You can see we've got a sample spot 1 here, which is, you can think of it as sort of our control before any of the sites. A sample spot 2 is pretty much at the housing development. Sample spot 3 is in between the housing development and the textile mill. Sample spot 4 here at the textile mill. And sample spot 5 is at our site of concern where we've observed the algae growth and the fish kill. And so with all of the different experiments that we do, with most of them anyway, depending on what we're looking at, we're going to be looking at each of these different spots to try to see if we can see some patterns. You know, for instance, and this is not an experiment that we're doing, but just as an example, maybe we're looking at the level of phosphate in the river. Do we maybe see very low or normal levels of phosphate here at sample spot 1, but then really, really high levels of phosphate here at sample spot 2? And then possibly then declining as we go on, declining steadily as we go on. So if we saw something like that, that would then lead us to think possibly that the housing development, fertilizers from the housing development are leaching into the river and really jacking up that level of phosphates, which then gets steadily diluted as we move downstream because the levels consistently went down. Again, that's completely made up. That's not even an experiment that we are doing, but that's the sort of thought process that you're going to need to apply throughout the semester. What sort of patterns are you seeing among these spots? And even week to week. Maybe one week you see a really high conductivity level here at sample spot 4. And then maybe that correlates to a really high level of nitrates, which we'll be seeing later, which we'll be seeing in one of our experiments as well. So again, that's not necessarily data that you will be seeing, but I'm trying to illustrate the way that you're going to have to think about things and the way that you're going to have to try to figure out what's going on is putting all this together, thinking about the semester as a whole as we move through these modules. And are you seeing something that seems to be kind of consistently happening at one of the spots that might relate to one of the sites? Thinking about the sites in relation to each other. Do you see really high levels maybe at spot 2 and spot 4, but things decrease other places? What does that maybe mean? And so really just sort of thinking about what is happening along the river. Now, and honestly, I really like this project. This is sort of unusual in first semester chemistry labs. Most labs, to be honest, are sort of run as you learn something in lecture. Maybe you learn about energy in lecture, and then you come into lab and you do a lab that's simply associated with energy and you get some data. and those are fine labs, and that's certainly nothing wrong with running a lab program like that. But this really shows you what scientists and chemists might do. This is a real thing that might have to be done, is that the DEP really might come to a group of people and say, something's going on here. We've got to figure it out. And a lot of the experiments that we do throughout the semester are real things that would be done in a situation like this to try to figure out what's going on with water quality. Now, as far as tying into lecture material, there's a little bit of that, definitely. And we certainly tie in loosely to some of the lecture material that we'll be covering in CHY 113. But that's not necessarily the main goal. And I'll tie things into lecture as much as I can as we go on. But really the big goals of this lab are to develop some of your lab skills, are, you know, to get you thinking like a scientist, to get you working with your hands, to get you running experiments and in the lab and really doing things. And then tying into some lecture material whenever we can. And so that's the big goal of the semesters. We're trying to figure out what is happening in this river. And so, like I said, we've got a series of 5 different experiments that we will work through. Now, the first experiment that we're going to be doing, is module 0. And this is where it does get really unfortunate that we are remote to start out the semester, because this first experiment that you're not actually going to be in the lab to do is a module that is simply designed to get you into the lab and start looking at some of the equipment. You know, pulling out and actually holding a beaker and an Erlenmeyer flask and a graduated cylinder and seeing what is the difference in these things and what one is used for what. And to get you practicing using the balances to measure things and just getting you familiar with some of the equipment and the tools that we're going to use. Like I said, you're unfortunately going to miss that part. It won't be awful. You'll still be able to catch up on that. In fact, we've only been doing this module 0 for a couple of years now. Normally we just sort of jumped right in and had students going right at it. So you'll be okay. But you will have as to actually do the lab. And so transitioning now to talk about what week 1 is going to look like here during next week. I'm recording this on Friday, in case you didn't know. But for the week of Monday the 24th, so the way that your lab is going to go is that hopefully you're watching these videos for one thing. And then what we've got for you is if you go to our website, and if you go here to module 0, measurements and density, you'll see the measurements and density, procedural videos and data. And so what we've got here is from when we did run the course 100% remotely last spring. We never came into the lab last spring at all. We did everything. The whole course was done remotely. And so as a result of that, we have some videos for you that are videos of myself actually performing all of the procedures. And so that's what you'll be doing for your lab. Instead of going into the lab and working as you normally would be, since we are remote right now, you'll be watching these videos and writing in your lab notebooks as if you are performing the experiment. And so for this first part, that's not so important. This module 0 equipment intro, this is literally me just pulling up pieces of equipment and showing you this is a graduated cylinder, this is a beaker, this is how the balance works, and so forth. But for these other 2 parts here, this is the actual procedure. If you look in your lab manual on, where are we here? So the procedure that starts in your lab manual on page 7, there's not a whole lot to the actual procedure itself, but these are videos of me performing that procedure. And again, during those parts, you should be writing in your lab notebooks as if you are the ones actually doing it. And then all the data that you'll use for your post lab will be found right here. And so there's a couple main parts to that. One of those, as you can see labeled here, beaker or graduated cylinder. Beakers and graduated cylinders are both designed to hold liquids. One of them is designed more for just sort of storage and approximate measurements, whereas the other one is designed for much more precise volume measurements. We're going to try to figure out which is which, because then as the semester goes on, it'll be real important for you to know which one to use. If you just need to grab a bunch of water, you're going to use one of them. But if you need to, for instance, measure precisely 23 milliliters of a certain solution, then you'd use the other one. This other part here, density of unknowns, is where I have a couple of different unknown liquids and a couple of different unknown solids. And we're going to find mass and volume measurements of those in a couple of different ways in order to then find the density of those so that we can use that density to hopefully identify what the materials are. And that will be your module 0 experiment, lab procedures. And so as your lab, like I said, in place of coming to lab on for the week of the 24th, in place of coming to lab, you'll be watching these videos, writing your lab notebooks, and then doing your post lab. Remember, your post lab, your notebook and your post lab is always due the following week. And so for that following week, the week of the 31st, what you will have due at that point, if you go to the schedule, so you see the schedule here, the week of the 31st, you've got your module 0 notebook pages and your post lab, and then your module 1, which is the experiment we'll be doing at that point, hopefully live in the lab at that point. We'll be doing module 1, and so your pre-lab exercises and your pre-lab notebook template will be due at that point as well. Now, a note on the module 1 pre-lab. Part of your module 1 pre-lab, and you'll see this in a couple different places, but if you look at your module 1 pre-lab exercises on page 20, you'll see at the very bottom, number 7, complete the Excel exercise in the tutorial in the scientific analysis section of the manual. Hand in the Excel graph assignment with these exercises. Part of your pre-lab for module 1 is to play with Excel and to start to be familiar with it. So if you look in your lab manual, starting on page almost there. So starting on page Roman numeral 17, you'll find an Excel tutorial. And those first few pages walk you through how to do various things in Excel and how do you input some of the information. How do you then do analysis with that? How do you set things up so that Excel will do formulas for you? How do you graph in Excel? If you're really unfamiliar with Excel, what I highly recommend is go through that tutorial starting on, like I said, Roman numeral page, oh, did I say 17? I meant 27, sorry. Roman numeral page 27. I highly recommend that you go through that tutorial and all of the things that I've got images for here in the manual. And so like all of these things here that you see that are being done, go through those and do those yourself in Excel as well. Work through this and sort of see this as a guide to actually do all of this as well. That's not part of your assignment. That's not anything that you'll be turning in. That's just some advice from me to you, that if you do that, if you go through and do these and then do the graphs that are on page 30 and 31 and so forth, if you do those, you'll be learning some of the Excel skills that you're going to have to use throughout the semester. We'll be doing a lot of Excel work this semester and a lot of various analysis and spreadsheet work. And the more that you go through this tutorial and really try to learn how to use it, if you're unfamiliar with Excel, the more you really go through this and really use this tutorial as it's designed, the better off you'll be. But then you'll also see that on page 35, again, Roman numeral page 35, we're in the very beginning of the manual. But on Roman numeral page 35, there is an Excel assignment. And that Excel assignment is absolutely part of your pre-lab for module 1. And so do not forget that. That is a big part of your pre-lab and must be done as part of your pre-lab assignment for module 1. And so that is all. That is our lab meeting for the week. Again, as I mentioned in the previous video, I do apologize for having to do sort of this asynchronous recorded video version. That's sort of the hand that life is dealing us right now, and that's just the reality of where we're at. And that's all for our lab meeting. Thanks for watching, and as always, do not hesitate to email me if you have absolutely any questions or concerns about anything. Thank you.